Hi everyone, today I'll be sharing about how to do your work fast. I think it's a fine balance between doing your work fast and at the same time producing quality work. So usually one comes at the expense of the other. If you want to produce quality work, usually you take a lot of time and then you won't be able to finish your work as fast as you can. My point is going to be a bit controversial, but I do feel that it's not wise to give in 101% for every single piece of work, because this will come at the expense of your time, and which also means that you have to work longer hours and sleep less. I think one main takeaway that I realized from practice is that being fast is very important. Not saying that you should be fast and careless, but being fast and accurate, relatively accurate at the same time. And the way I try to achieve this balance is by making sure that I always draw the key principles and first principles from every piece of work I do, at least when I was training. I will always ask myself, after I finish a piece of work and my senior has reviewed and I've done all the comments, basically I will always compare the first piece of work that I produce against what my mentor or my boss actually sends out. And then I'll ask myself, what are some learning points that I get from this piece of work? I don't always write down, I just do it subconsciously, but I do encourage people to write it down so that you can just internalize it. But if you're able to internalize without writing down, then sure, go ahead. But I do find this very helpful because each time from a piece of advice, if I'm able to draw certain key principles from the advice, then I'll be able to transfer these principles and apply these principles in all my other advice or all my other pieces of work, so that I don't have to keep making the same mistakes and keep having to edit the same things all over again. One example would be, for instance, if the first time I did my work, my mentor commented, okay, where is the law for this? Or where's the analysis? So from there, I can gather that, okay, the way my mentor sees a good piece of work is that I have to state the law, and after that I have to state my analysis clearly. I cannot simply just put the conclusion there. It might sound like a duh, of course you have to do that. But the reality is that somehow when you are the one doing the work, you realize that all this may not come naturally and may not come as you are rushing through things. But if you are able to grasp these principles, right, you can just apply it across all your pieces of work and more or less at least produce a 90% work, so that your mentor doesn't have to give you more comments and you don't have to spend more time re-editing the work. The examples that I gave were just more structural advice, but in terms of legal advice, I would say the principles that you can draw would be, okay, every time is, for instance, an employment matter, which websites do I go to? MOM website. Where are the guidelines? There are TAFEP guidelines, there are MOM guidelines, there are COVID guidelines. So if you know roughly where you can find things and which legislation are the applicable ones, then it's very straightforward. Each time you see an issue, you can just run to that piece of legislation. Basically, it's a key principle of what your laws are and what guidelines are relevant. And I think this is super crucial and what helps you do work fast. The second point I have is also related to the first point of having key principles. Essentially, the second point is to remember what these key principles are and where are they on which file. This sounds very vague and confusing, but let me give you an example. Whenever we advise on certain types of clauses, such as restrictive covenants, for lay people, restrictive covenants are clauses in your employment contract, for example. They can be found in other types of agreements, but employment contracts, I guess, more relevant for most people since all of us, or most of us, are employed. So these are clauses that will say that after you end your employment relationship with your current employer, you cannot find a similar job, or you cannot go into a business that's competing with your current employer. Essentially, that restricts you from finding certain jobs after you terminate your employment relationship. So usually, whenever we see these type of clauses, we give a standard advice to tell our clients, or whether employer or employee, that this clause may not be enforceable for certain reasons. And once you know there's this key principle that every time you see this type of clause, you give this type of advice, it's super straightforward, right? Because once you review the first contract, you write down the advice, and after that, when you review a similar contract with a similar type of clause, you just need to copy and paste the same advice that you gave for the previous one, of course with necessary modifications, and just give the same advice. So if you can remember where are your key principles and in which agreements you left them, you can easily refer to all these key principles again and just reuse them. So you don't have to spend time again doing the whole research and doing your whole... Basically, you don't start from ground zero. You have to start as though you're already 2 steps ahead, so that you can really finish your work quicker. Third thing I think that would help is to write down important things about certain files so that you can easily refer to them whenever you need. So whenever I get a very complicated file and there are certain key facts that I feel are important, I would put them down in a separate document, in a note. So whenever I have to do work for that file, I'll just refer to my notes and not go through all the emails to see, oh, what happened, what are all these facts. And essentially, if you have to go through the whole process of reading through all the emails to recall what is going on with this file, it will be very inefficient. But if you have a separate document that states already the key important things that you need to remember for this file, then you can simply refer there and just kind of trigger your memory so that you don't have to spend all that time going through emails. Never ever trust your memory, because your memory will always fail you. This is something that I learned since university, that was where I developed the habit of writing every single thing that my prof said. Okay, not verbatim, but at least every key point I hear, I will definitely write it down, because my memory will fail me, and I'm super sure of that. Every time I told myself that, okay, I'll remember this, like this key legal principle, I'll definitely remember it. Yeah, at that point in time, it was super clear in my mind. 1 week later, it's gone. 2 months later, it's way beyond gone. It's like I can't even dig it out of my brain. I will get so confused trying to recall, did he even say this or did he say that? So for key things, I think you should always write it down. When your boss gives you instructions on how they want certain things to be done, I think you should always write it down, and it reduces the burden on your mind to have to actively recall or actively remember certain things. And I think memory comes with doing as well. So if you do more of the same type of thing or the same type of advice, it will just over time get into your brain. But I would say there is no point in kind of actively trying to sit there to memorize things when you can just literally write it down and refer to it while you're doing work. Yeah, so I think those are the 3 points that help me do my work fast. As a last final conclusion, I would say that as with life, everything has to be done one step at a time and one by one. Basically, if you have like 10 things to do, your mind has to be focused on one thing when you're doing that one thing. If you're doing task A, your mind shouldn't be thinking about B, C, D, E, F, G, or like other things in life if you want to be 100% productive. Understand this is not super easy to accomplish and easier said than done, because I myself am switching multiple tabs and all that. Like I'm doing A and a bit of B, a bit of C. I know sometimes you can't help it in practice, because while you're doing A, the client B says, oh, I'm rushing and I need my answer now. So suddenly when you're doing A halfway, you have to stop it and continue with B. But I guess that's another skill that you need to have. You kind of have to learn to switch between tasks fast, although task switching is super time consuming. Which is why I say ideally you should do things one step at a time. Meaning if you do A, you just focus on A first, finish it, and then do B. Don't do half of A and do half of B. But in the case where the circumstances don't allow you to finish A first and then move on to B, like when you're doing A halfway, you have no choice but to jump to B, then that's where my point on having things written down in a separate document comes into play, so that you can quickly refer and you know, okay, for task B, these are the facts and these are the important things I need to note, or like these are the outstanding points that my client wanted based on the last call, something like that. Essentially, it's a strategy to reduce your switching time also if you have no choice but to switch. I just think this is super linked to the wisdom that the older people used to tell us when we were kids. When we were kids, people always tell us to study smart, not study hard, right? So it applies to work as well. You have to work smart and not work hard. Having said that, I do see that there are a lot of lawyers who love to work hard because it's like a trait that's innate in them that they can't get rid of. Like they just have to work hard, and pain, hard work, long hours, it's just in their blood, and it just drives them and it makes them feel very fulfilled. If you are not that type of person, I suggest you work smart. Meaning, you try and do things as fast as possible and offer as much accuracy as possible. You don't have to give your 101% for every single piece of work, because nobody's going to read in such detail, depending on the client. Especially if there are some clients who just can't really be bothered. Basically you need to know what your client wants and what do they read. Some clients don't even read emails, you know. You can send them a whole long chunk of advice, and in the end what they want is the conclusion. So can I do or can I not do? And if you have this kind of client, then you have to handle and tailor a response accordingly. Basically give them an answer that satisfies them, so they don't come back with so many clarifications, but also contain sufficient analysis to cover your backside. And how to strike this balance is something that I guess either you learn from your seniors, or you just understand people well enough, or you just kind of get a feel over time in practice. Hope that my tips help, and have a lovely week. Bye!